Welcome everyone to today's Explainer. We have got an absolutely fantastic journey ahead of us. We're going to explore the darkest, deepest parts of our world's oceans by tracking the fascinating evolution of sea monsters. We are going to journey all the way from ancient, terrifying sailor myths that kept early explorers awake at night, straight through to the mind-bending scientific realities of our largely unexplored oceans today. So, get comfortable, because the truth we're going to uncover is often much stranger and, honestly, much larger than the fiction.
Okay, let's dive right into this. I want you to imagine, just for a second, that the towering, ship-crushing monsters from ancient legends weren't just campfire stories. What if they were actually real, just lurking beneath the dark waves right now? We usually dismiss these old tales as just wild imagination, right? But what if ghost sailors were actually trying to warn us about things they genuinely saw? As we dive into the evidence today, you might just find yourself questioning what's really hiding out there in the deep water.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, Monsters Born from Reality.
Think back to before we had modern marine biology. Humans had this deeply primal fear of the unknown. So when sailors encountered very real, entirely natural, but terrifyingly massive things in the ocean, their minds really struggled to process it. Basically, they filled in the blanks with monsters. They turned reality into myth. Take the myth of giant sea serpents, for example. Across so many cultures, from the Naga gods in South Asia to Norse legends, people feared these mile-long snakes. In Gloucester, Massachusetts, back between 1817 and 1819, dozens of people swore they saw a huge monster with a snake-like head. But the reality? It's just as fascinating. In 1808 in Scotland, and again in 1860 in Bermuda, massive, bizarre carcasses washed ashore. They weren't magical serpents, though. One was actually a 40 to 50-foot basking shark, which totally glides through the water like a snake. The other was the deeply eerie oarfish. These real fish can reach 50 feet long. They have absolutely no scales. They ripple like silver ribbons, and they have these strange red filaments along their spines. They usually only surface at night or when they're dying, which makes them seem incredibly mysterious to anyone lucky or, well, unlucky enough to spot one.
So the crucial point here is that these stories are almost always anchored in truth. And there's probably no better example of this than the myth of Moby Dick, Herman Melville's famous tale of a vengeful giant white whale. Melville didn't just invent that out of thin air. He based it on the absolutely horrific real-life story of the whaling ship Essex. On November 20th, 1820, a massive sperm whale, completely furious at being hunted, rammed the Essex with shocking force and literally sank it. The 20 crew members were left adrift in the Pacific for 89 horrific days, eventually driven to cannibalism just to survive. 19th century sailors were out there slaughtering these highly intelligent giants for oil, and sometimes the whales fought back. Moby Dick wasn't just a fantasy, it was a powerful symbol of nature striking back.
Moving right along to Section 2, the legend and science of the Kraken. This brings us to perhaps the most infamous sea beast of all time. We're going to explore a legend that has incredibly deep roots in actual biological science. It's fascinating how centuries of terrifying sailor folklore eventually led to concrete discoveries. Starting way back in 1180, we have the very first written reports from Norse sailors describing a gigantic, squid-like beast that could literally drag entire ships down into whirlpools. For hundreds of years, this was just considered a sailor's myth. But then, in 1853, a massive carcass washes up on a beach in Denmark. It was a giant squid. This was the first time something like this had been seen and documented up close by scientists, and it looked exactly like the Kraken from the stories. And the history doesn't stop there. Actually, it takes a wild turn in 2011 with the discovery that pushes this legend millions of years into the past. So, in 2011, a scientist named Professor Mark McMenamin was examining the 200-million-year-old bones of a massive sea reptile called a Shonosaurus. But something was very, very wrong with the fossil. The reptile's neck looked like it had been violently broken. On top of that, the bones weren't just scattered randomly on the seafloor, they were strangely grouped together, like a giant puzzle, and they had these peculiar marks on them that looked exactly like they were made by massive squid suckers.
Professor McManaman actually summarized this chilling finding beautifully. He said, "The way the bones were placed is like how today's octopuses pull food to their homes." Think about what that implies for a second. For an ancient, kraken-like cephalopod to kill and eat a marine reptile of that massive size and then drag its bones into a pile, the squid would have needed to be over 30 meters long. That is over 98 feet.
To put that into perspective, that is more than twice the size of any giant squid we have ever found in modern times. Absolutely wild.
And we know for a fact that giant predatory squids definitely existed. While pop culture monsters like Cthulhu are pure fiction, the Tusothuthus was absolutely real. This was a massive 40-foot-long creature. That's the length of 2 giraffes laid end to end. It had a hard inner shell making it incredibly fast and strong, and it actively hunted giant fish and baby marine reptiles before it was wiped out by the asteroid 66 million years ago. So the Kraken might be a myth today, but monsters exactly like it undeniably ruled our oceans in the past.
Which leads us to Section 3, What if Krakens ruled? Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer hypothetical terror of it. What if a highly advanced, intelligent cephalopod the size of a few small islands was actually alive, breeding and hunting in the North Atlantic today? How would that actually work? Let's walk step by step through the grim hunting sequence of this beast. I want you to imagine being an 18th century sailor. Step 1. The Kraken stays perfectly still in the deep, dark water. Step 2. You suddenly see a massive, unprecedented amount of fish schooling right at the surface. It seems like a miracle catch, right? But it's actually a harbinger of doom. The Kraken is driving them up. Step 3. You sail your ship right into the middle of the catch to investigate. And then, Step 4. The tentacles rise, wrap around the hull, and pull your ship completely under.
But okay, physics time. How hard is it to actually pull a ship underwater? We can use Archimedes' principle to figure this out. Let me just do a quick science translation for you here. Basically, the upward buoyant force keeping a ship afloat is equal to the weight of the water the ship pushes out of the way. If you take the gross tonnage of a ship, multiply it by the density of seawater and gravity, and subtract the weight of the ship itself, you calculate exactly how much downward force a sea monster would need to apply to sink you.
And that number is just staggering. 400,000 kilograms. That is the immense, unfathomable sheer force a Kraken would need to exert just to drag a regular-sized historical ship completely underwater. In non-mathematical terms, the Kraken is terrifyingly strong, and you and your crew are, unfortunately, definitely going to be Kraken food.
If a creature capable of pulling 400,000 kilograms actually lived in the Atlantic, it would completely rewrite human history. Take the Vikings, for instance. They wouldn't have been able to explore the seas. They'd have been trapped in Scandinavia, picked off every time they launched a longboat. Christopher Columbus, his ships would have been dragged to a watery grave, meaning he never reaches the Americas. The New World might not have been widely connected to Europe until the invention of air travel. The entire globe's historical timeline would be fundamentally forever altered, the whole shebang.
And the modern ecological and societal ripple effects would be just as wild. Global fishing industries would be heavily disrupted. I mean, who wants to fish in waters where a Kraken lives? Not me, for sure. Plus, the presence of such an apex predator would force rapid marine evolution. Prey animals, like whales and large sharks, would have to develop extreme speed and camouflage just to survive. And because human beings are incredibly curious and, let's be honest, a little bit crazy, we would undoubtedly see the rise of extreme Kraken adventure tourism. Thrill seekers and scientists would absolutely flock to the oceans just for a chance to spot one.
Bringing it back to reality with Section 4, Secrets of the Abyss.
Let's pull back from the hypothetical scenarios for a minute because the truth is, we don't need to invent giant squid scenarios to find eerie, chilling mysteries. They still exist right now, today. Let me introduce you to a modern internet legend that's been gaining traction, El Gran Maja. Witness descriptions and illustrations online claim this beast lives incredibly deep in the freezing Arctic Ocean, way, way below where sunlight can reach. It is supposedly over 2,000 feet long. That is the size of 6 football fields laid end to end. And it supposedly has a mouth big enough to swallow a whale whole, and a terrifying face lined with 6 glowing white eyes just piercing through the total darkness.
And this brilliantly illustrates how modern technology hasn't entirely erased the myth-making process. Just look at the supposed evidence people cite for El Gran Maja. Researchers have indeed recorded these eerie, unexplained sounds deep underwater in the Arctic. Now, scientists will argue it's just the sound of massive ice shelves breaking apart, but internet sleuths insist it sounds alive. There are rumors of massive shadows passing by and blocking the lights of deep-sea expedition cameras, and even unverified stories of crew members being so shaken by what they saw that they left the mission and never returned to sea. Science says there's zero proof for this creature, but our human fear of the dark makes it feel terrifyingly possible.
But here is the statistic that really grounds all of this and honestly justifies that fear. 95% of our own planet's oceans remain completely unexplored. We have only seen 5%. The vast, overwhelming majority of our own world's waters remain a total pitch-black mystery to us. We know that 50-foot oarfish,
furious whales, and 40-foot ancient squids were all very, very real. So, if 95% of our ocean is still a complete secret, what else is hiding in the dark? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep your eyes on the horizon, and I'll catch you next time.